Welcome to Profiles in Leadership Podcast, where we explore ideas and discuss strategies from leaders in the physical therapy and healthcare world. I am your host, Steve Anderson. These podcasts are sponsored by VGM Advantage, who provide member services to private practice physical therapists, allowing them to have the resources of a larger company while staying independent and PT owned. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Rich Katz. Rich Katz is the Director of Contracting and Network Services for Therapeutic Associates, which is a 64-year-old physical therapy private practice with over 85 sites in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. He also serves as the Contracted Executive Director for Northwest Rehab Alliance, a 3-state PT IPA with over 375 clinics and close to 1,400 providers, serving payers and providers with managed care contracted relationships. Rich has been a presenter at the private practice section nationally and has done regional presentations for the Oregon Physical Therapy and Independent Practice Group and the Private Practice Special Interest Group of the Physical Therapy Association of Washington State, the Ohio Physical Therapy Network, the Louisiana Physical Therapy Network, Desert States Physical Therapy Network of New Mexico, and the Physical Therapy Business Alliance of Arizona. He recently was a guest speaker at the annual Physio First Educational Conference in the United Kingdom. Rich has been involved in the healthcare sales, marketing, and contracting since 1983 and has worked specifically in rehabilitation contracting since 1991. He is a 1981 graduate of the University of Oregon School of Business with a management degree and a secondary emphasis in finance. Rich, thanks for being my very first interviewee on the podcast. I appreciate it very much, and it's been a few months since we've had a chance to talk, so I'm looking forward to talking with you today about physical therapy networks.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I hope we can help your audience out with some history and explanation of networks and where they sit in the marketplace right now.
So, Rich, I see you as a pioneer in this field. I mean, back in the early to mid '90s, I believe it was, we started talking about networks and formed one of the original networks in the nation. And so a lot of people feel they've been good. Some people feel that they're not as good. I just like your perspective to see why they were necessary, if they still are necessary, and what has changed over the years from what they were back then to what they are now.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for your kind words. Certainly, the true leaders in the physical therapy profession, like Mike Whiteburr and Jim McKillop and a variety of other people, have the same concepts of networking with various providers throughout geographic regions and so on. I think what we did in the 1990s was employ a strategy that I refer to as the pufferfish strategy, that was a reaction to the large corporate and publicly funded physical therapy clinics or companies coming into our market space. They were buying up clinics and creating footprints that they thought would help them corner the market with the insurance companies and the new managed care contracts that were being developed at that time.
So it's kind of safe to say that it's probably safe to say that it was a strategy born out of more of a defensive strategy, or maybe even a because of fear strategy.
To some degree, yes, I would say that. But as they say, the best defense is a good offense.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I think what we did was we partnered with like-minded, culturally compatible clinicians throughout the Northwest to create that footprint and then develop a product around it that we could take to the insurance companies and turn the tables on the large corporate publicly funded entities that were coming into the Northwest. And it succeeded. They disappeared after a period of time, and Northwest Rehab Alliance, the network we helped form, and you were actually the president of for a period of time, resulted in us maintaining our position and our market share, and benefited quite a few independent practitioners that had agreed to work with us in that fashion. So while it was defensive, it succeeded in not only defending, but ultimately in an offensive type of result, eliminating elements of the larger corporate players that were threatening to overtake our markets.
And what was the biggest challenge back then? Was it getting physical therapists to understand why this was a good idea and to get them on board, or was it trying to convince insurance companies that they should contract with a network versus individual PTs?
I think it was both. What we had to do is simultaneously convince providers that they needed to take a leap of faith and join together in a way that would attract insurance companies to work with them, and at the same time discuss with the insurance companies the benefits of dealing with a single point of administration to establish their physical therapy coverage. So really both motivations were there, and we had to navigate the concerns of providers for capital commitment and results with the concerns of the payer community for wanting an adequate provider network that could best serve their enrollees, and to place some trust in us that we could develop that network for them.
And what do you think, so comparing back then to now, what do you see the biggest changes are?
I think we're actually going through a deja vu period where the network process that we started in the 1990s and succeeded in helping us maintain our market position, the value of it ebbed somewhat as the managed care 1.0 era had less effect on the market, and there was a great pushback away from that HMO type of constrained provider panel. What happened, I think, in the last few years is because of the rising healthcare costs and the GDP that is being taken up by healthcare in the United States, the same issues are in place that were in the 90s that has created a new interest in networks. Albeit now, I think the concerns are slightly different in that there was, in the early years of networking, a much more concerted interest in cost savings and access. And those things are still there when we're dealing with insurance companies, but the focus has changed a little bit to be more of a discussion of value, fee-for-value, alternative payment models, and ways to ensure quality of care and not just the lowest possible price. I'm not saying that insurance companies still aren't very seriously concerned about what they pay providers, but now there's an additional focus on the value that those services bring to their enrollees, and is their premium dollar being well spent.
You know, and I think when you look at it from the physical therapist point of view, sometimes there's a feeling that, to become a part of a network, it's more of a volume game, and I have to give up a percentage of fees to do that, and so that's always the tug and the pull. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, you've experienced in your network work that you've actually been able to affect fees on the upside. as part of the network.
That's correct. I think that we were able to do something maybe some of the other networks were not able to do, because I always considered a network to be needing to be something more than just dots on a map, that you had to build a product offering around it. And that's where, for instance, the genesis of our Care Connections platform began. We began a concerted effort to not just be dots on a map, but to provide clinical practice guidelines, to collect outcome data, to collect patient satisfaction data, and to promote business-to-business efficiency by providing services like credentialing for the insurance companies and absorbing those costs. And then I think what happened, Steve, is the insurance companies became very satisfied with the product that they were buying from us. The clinics that we were able to bring to them, the practice guidelines, the outcome data, the satisfaction data, the credentialing services, those types of things. And because we provided those services and the value of those services and absorbed some of their administrative costs, it created a relationship that allowed for more reasonable negotiations with the insurance companies, because were they to part company with us, they would, in essence, be taking on a set of responsibilities and their associated costs that we had been absorbing. So it gave us some leverage in terms of our relationships with the insurance companies to maintain relationships. And when we went to them and explained that our costs had risen for whatever reasons, there was a more reasonable conversation about compensating us to not go backward. And I think that product offering concept of being more than dots on a map is what differentiated us from many, many other networks around the country that had different levels of success, but most not maybe quite as effective as we were.
So maybe that's one of the changes that we can talk about over the last 20 years, is that initially I would suspect that insurance companies didn't really understand that concept or really care about it. But now they seem to be more willing to look at some of those quality issues. And also because of that, and because of dealing with a well-run one administrator, as you mentioned, perhaps they're willing to pay a little bit more for that service than they were in the past.
Correct. And I think, Steve, it's very important to understand that to keep the equitable nature of the relationship, it was important to share with them what our product was and its focus on quality and reduced administrative expenses for both parties in order for them to agree to those fee increases, which were always nominal, not so significant that it would position the insurance company into a place that they would seriously consider terminating the relationship with the network. Instead, it was one of where they balanced the services that they were getting, the administrative costs that were being absorbed, the value-added services that they were getting from the network against what was a reasonable request for additional compensation, and found that the request was equitable and would maintain the contract. And then the key was to do that periodically, year over year or every 2 years, with those small incremental fee increases, such that the payment levels in the Northwest, I think, better reflect both the value, quality, and costs of care that the physical therapy clinics in our network deliver.
Tell me, too, I know that you're involved with kind of a group of other networks. In other words, our friends in Iowa that you've consulted with and advised them forming their network, and then we have the New Mexico network that's been a part of this bigger group for a long time. So explain that a little bit and why it's important for network executives to meet and talk about ideas and so on.
Well, first of all, I think good decision making from a group is probably better than good decision making from a single party. I think that the value of network executive directors comparing notes and sharing ideas for how they're building their network product and so on without running amiss of any confidential information in our contracts and so on has been valuable because one network is not another network, and that each network can benefit from what another network may or may not be doing, or even learn from their mistakes. In Iowa, the group of practitioners in that market space, I think, learned a great deal from what our experience had been, and we were able to share certain tools and tactics and considerations with them that got them up and running fairly quickly. I think as networks begin to target employers as opposed to insurers, which is kind of a new proposition that is being looked at, that employers run across state lines in many cases, and therefore a network-to-network relationship can help support any one network's agreement with an employer, the way an insurance company contract tends to stop at state lines due to the regulations that are governing insurance. Employers, on the other hand, because they have employees across many states, networks in those states can work together to support that employer and kind of new level. And I think that's more of the future of networks, is networks from different regions of the country working together to support a common employer client. The way that the regulatory environment hasn't really allowed networks across state lines to support a single payer the same way. So I think that there's a new frontier here for networks to establish themselves, work with other networks, approach a different form of customer in an employer, and then work together to satisfy that employer's needs for coverage outside even their catchment area, their region of the country where their footprint exists.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit further, because both you and I were at the Graham sessions in January, this last January in Florida, and our keynote speaker there, Dave Chase, was listening to us have a discussion, and somebody said, we need to be better at negotiating and getting appointments and talking with insurance companies and all that. And I remember he said, your focus should be on the employer, not so much the insurance companies. And I remember looking at you and the audience as you were sitting there, because you've been saying that forever. So why is it taking so long to get there? And do you see that as the future of networks then? Are we someday just going to be working directly with employers and much less with the insurance companies? How do you see that dynamic work out? And why are we kind of slow to get that going?
Well, first of all, I think to some degree we are working with employers, but with a middleman in terms of the insurance companies. A statistic that I recently picked up in some conversations with different insurance companies in our region is that about 50% of their business is administrative service organization business, where they are actually serving the self-insured employer.
That's more of the TPA type of thing, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so only 50% of their business is fully insured business. Consequently, I think it's been kind of slow on the uptake because first, employers do need insurance companies to process their claims, and they are the natural source of a provider network. However, I think what is really changing in the marketplace is where provider groups are independently going to employers and saying, you're self-insured, you can direct your insurance company to process your claims however you like, but we're the ones that would like to develop the programs and service components with you that are customized to your employees in such a way that you're going to get more value. And I think HR directors, finance people at employers are starting to understand that they can better represent themselves than their insurance companies can. And I think that's where you're starting to see this transition. But I agree with you. It's been slow because the insurance companies obviously have a stake in all this, and they are not interested in their employer customers going around them and cutting deals directly with providers. There have even been obstacles to that in contracts, Steve. One of the nation's larger insurers has in their contract that you, as a provider on their panel, can't even talk to their employer customers. But again, I see that changing, and I see employers realizing that they're not getting the value from their insurance companies that they want. And so when an employer ends up talking to a provider group directly, they're realizing that there's a whole new value proposition there for them.
And the other thing that came up during the Graham session discussions was that insurance companies are smart and they're strategic, and they understand that times are changing. And a lot of them, like Cambia up in our neck of the woods here, is investing and creating very many different business opportunities and divisions, realizing that someday what has been their bread and butter for all this time maybe is starting to go away at some point, and they're preparing for that in the future. So I think we're seeing some movement on the insurance side as well in that area.
Yes, you're right. Cambia, just to give some evidence to what you're saying to the listeners, has an actual venture capital division, in essence, that is dedicated to taking money that they have in their surpluses and reserves and investing in different forms of business to diversify their portfolio and make sure that they have a place in the market when and if employers do end up doing more of their dealings with provider networks and provider groups directly, and they, again, just end up being that third-party administrator or administrative service organization.
Do you think that part of the slower growth in that employer market is because, as physical therapists, it's just a small piece of the health benefit formula? If we could bind together with physicians or other practitioners and go in as one group, that might have better success rate at convincing employers that this is the way to go to the future to reduce healthcare benefit costs?
I do but only to a degree. I think what you're saying is that physical therapy being only about 2 to 3% of the premium dollar is a relatively small spend compared to what a self-insured employer or an insurance company would be paying hospitals, doctors, laboratories, imaging companies, etc. Mm-hmm. But the pitch from the physical therapy standpoint is that an investment in a direct relationship with a physical therapy network can result in exponential savings for an employer in other costly areas of medical care for their employees.
Right.
So even though it is a small part of the premium dollar, the potential results from investing actually more dollars in rehabilitation services, prevention services that can be delivered by physical therapists and occupational therapists, and other types of services that are available to them from the physical therapy and occupational therapy community can have an enormous return on investment. But I agree the obstacle that exists is that benefits manager at an employer who maybe doesn't realize the potential impact that a small spend and even a slightly larger spend in physical therapy can result in it's actually an investment that can result in significant cost savings in other areas of medicine.
Yeah, it takes that next level of sophistication of the employer health benefits people to see that higher level piece. It's not necessarily exactly directly related. It's that next level, and it's interesting because and it feels so self-serving because physical therapists are always like, well, this makes total sense to us. Why doesn't anyone else get it? And so it just takes more education and then some experience with doing that for employers and making a big difference, and then getting some kind of data or information back from that employer showing that it did make a difference, and hopefully that'll lead to more opportunities.
I agree, and you just touched upon the data. We have such a wealth of clinical outcome data in our Care Connections database, patient satisfaction data, et cetera, that if we do have cost information from an employer or an insurance company that we can tie back their spend to the type of clinical results and employee satisfaction that we're able to generate, when you have those two components together, you've satisfied that value equation. And I think a lot of the HR people and the finance people in the employers are starting to understand that and are willing to generate those reports that show what their costs are that we can then marry to our clinical outcome piece to actually produce some indice of value. And I think that data-driven approach is going to become paramount in the coming year to 2 years.
So getting back to how networks are different today then, so it sounds like what you're saying is that, to attract some of these major employers that have employees in multiple states, there's hardly any company that's big enough, and surely a single private practice PT can't go in and do this. So this is where the network comes in, as to perhaps providing the same philosophy and the same types of treatment to this employer, and perhaps get them to look at it just beyond where their headquarters are, more like where all their extensions of their company are.
That's correct. I think that what you're going to see is, as the whole country searches for solutions to the ongoing healthcare cost issues and so on, that as David Chase indicated, as you said at the Graham sessions, almost every company is in the healthcare business, whether they know it or not, and that the insurance community probably hasn't been offering the types of solutions that have been that will work for employers, and so they're searching for new ways of doing business. And I think provider networks, rather than, as you said, the individual clinic here, there, and everywhere, will have far more presence and capability, and therefore ability to work with a large employer. And when you're dealing with so many of the large national companies that we see in all kinds of different industries, they will have a need for their employees, wherever they may be in a region or across the country. They will want the same level of service and return on investment wherever those employees might be. And that, again, speaks to the virtue of a network and then the virtue of networks from around the country working with one another to satisfy that common employer client that might have people on the West Coast, the East Coast, the Midwest, wherever it might be, that they can get a homogeneous product with the right return on investment wherever their employers or employees might live.
Well, just to kind of wind up here, Rich, why don't you just, was there anything I didn't ask you about networks, or what are you feel the future of networks is strong as ever? Just kind of give us what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years as far as networks go.
I'd say that there's probably two things that I think the network community is probably going to have to understand, come to grips with, and facilitate. One, I believe, is the concept of risk-taking. I think that networks and their product offering are going to have to possibly take on some risk for clinical outcome, et cetera, pay for performance types of programs. They're going to have to be involved in those, et cetera. So I think that product offering that I think is essential for any network to be successful is going to have a platform like our Care Connections platform, et cetera, that is going to be able to help them manage quality, manage risk that they're bound to take from employers and or insurance companies. The second area I think that is on the horizon and that we're watching closely is the concept of the shared management service organization across network members, where in our case, Therapeutic Associates supplies credentialing, contracting, compliance, network development services to insurance companies, and we can certainly do that to employers. But there is the cost side of running a physical therapy clinic, and I think that there's going to be more management service organization services expanded out to network members that could include billing, collections, back office, front office functions, those types of things. But I think we're just seeing the tip of that, and I think the jury is out on whether or not the MSO model, expanded MSO model of a network is really going to take or not. I think that it's going to be explored, and I think it's going to be there's going to be different versions of it that are created, maybe in different networks and parts of the country. But I think that it's a change for the independent clinician to think along those lines. But I think it could have some traction. But I'm not. I haven't decided one way or the other whether it's going to take hold or not.
Yeah, and I think that it's a similar philosophy that like VGM Advantage is trying to provide services for private practitioners as well, with the idea that as an individual private practice, you can't always provide the resources or have the quality or the sophistication of services that a company that a lot of people use could. So it's kind of that, we're better together than we are separate. So why not do what we're really good at, which is treat the patients and help them heal, but on the other hand, get some help with some of the running the business side of things so that you can really focus on that and make it work.
Correct. I think that there's economies of scale to having a single management service organization that can relieve certain costs and headaches for the independent clinician that is served by that MSO. But I think that there is a limit to the value of those economies of scale. I still think that the real value of a network is going to be on the contracting side with the employers or with the insurance companies, and the MSO component on the cost side and the operation side of running a clinic in a network is going to be explored, but I'm not sure it's going to have the potentially dramatic reduction in costs that some think that would improve margins. I think that the top line and not the bottom line are probably going to be the place that a network can really benefit its constituent members, maybe more than on the bottom line or the cost line side.
Well, Rich, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us today. I know you well, and although you're not a PT yourself, I know that you understand the PT world and the business of PT probably better than any PT I know. And it's the thing that I think is amazing about a network is it gives more people that are in smaller practices exposure to someone like you on a regular basis, so that they can understand what you're thinking and what you're trying to do for them as a group and as the PT profession as a whole. So thank you very much for all you do for our profession, and I really appreciate your time with me today. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure talking to you again.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to Profiles in Leadership podcasts. And also thank you to VGM Advantage for sponsoring these podcast services. I look forward to our next session as we discuss pearls of wisdom from leaders with vision.